Once upon a time, in the land of Hausa tribe in the northern region of Nigeria in West Africa, there lived a beautiful and kind-hearted girl named Anaca, whose fate would soon change the kingdom forever. Anaca came from a poor family, but her parents cherished her deeply, for she was a gentle soul who always thought of others before herself. Despite their lack of wealth, Anaca's home was filled with love and laughter. But one day, the king of the land heard of Anaca's beauty and kindness. The king had many wives, but he was still childless, and he yearned for an heir to his throne. Intrigued by the stories of Anaca's heart and her gentle spirit, the king decided to marry her, hoping that her purity would bring him a son. And when Anaca arrived at the palace, the king treated her with great affection. He gave her the finest clothes, jewels, and a palace of her own. However, the king's other wives, who had long failed to bear him children, were consumed with envy. They despised Anaca for the love and attention she received from the king. But not long after Anaca became the king's wife, she found out that she was pregnant with his child. The news spread through the palace like wildfire. The king was overjoyed. At last, the gods had blessed him with an heir. But the rival wives' jealousy grew darker. They couldn't bear the thought of Anaca succeeding where they had failed. The day came for Anaca to give birth. But as she labored through the night, the rival wives plotted their wicked scheme. They bribed the palace midwife, an old woman with a heart as cold as stone, to switch Anaca's newborn baby with a puppy. In the darkness of the night, the midwife carried out their cruel plan. She buried Anaca's son in a hidden field outside the palace and placed a tiny puppy in his place. But when the sun rose, the king was summoned. He rushed to Anaca's side, eager to meet his long-awaited child. But instead of the cries of a baby, there was only silence. The midwife held out the puppy and said, "My king, your beloved Anaca has not given you a son but a dog." The king's heart shattered. His joy turned to anger and sorrow. He couldn't believe what he saw. How could this be? The rival wives stood in the background, showing shock and disgust, but inside, they were rejoicing. Their plan had worked. Blinded by grief, the king ordered Anaca to be banished. He could not bear the sight of her, believing she had deceived him. Anaca was sent to live in the chicken coop outside the palace, her once beautiful garments now replaced with rags. Every day, she cried, her heart aching not only for the life she had lost but for the child she knew had been stolen from her. But the story did not end there. Where Anaca's child was buried, a small, delicate flower began to grow. Its petals were a deep blue, and it gave off the sweetest scent anyone had ever smelled. So, one day, as the king was walking through the fields to clear his mind, he came upon the flower. Its fragrance stirred something deep within him, something familiar, yet distant. So, he ordered his servants to water and care for the flower daily, for it was unlike anything he had ever seen. And as the flower blossomed, the rival wives grew uneasy. They feared that somehow, the truth would come to light. So, one day, they bribed a servant to uproot the flower and feed it to a cow that grazed nearby. Reluctantly, the servant did as he was told, and the cow devoured the flower. So, the next morning, when the king came to admire the flower's beauty, it was gone. He was devastated. And when his servants told him what had happened, the king, in his sorrow, ordered the cow to be slaughtered. However, just before the cow was to be killed, something miraculous happened. The cow gave birth, not to one, but to 40 children. Each child was radiant and strong, and they all bore the mark of royalty. The king was speechless. So, he summoned the old midwife, who, in her fear, finally confessed to the wicked deed. Anaca's son had not been a dog, but a boy who had become a flower and now returned as part of this miraculous birth. The king's heart was heavy with guilt and rage. He had wronged Anaca, the woman who had loved him without question. So, the king immediately ordered the rival wives to be punished, and they were sent away from the palace, never to return. But the king knew that he had to make things right with Anaca. With tears in his eyes, he went to the chicken coop, where Anaca sat, her once radiant face now worn with sorrow. He knelt before her, humbling himself as he begged for her forgiveness. "I was blinded by lies," he said, his voice trembling. "But the gods have shown me the truth. Our son lives, and so do the children of justice." Anaca's tears flowed freely as she embraced the king. Though her heart still ached from the pain of betrayal, she saw the sincerity in his eyes and knew that the love they once shared could be rebuilt. In time, Anaca was restored to her place as the king's beloved queen. The children, a living symbol of justice and the triumph of truth, were cared for in the palace and raised with love and respect. The king decreed that their story would be told throughout the land, reminding everyone that truth and goodness would always prevail, no matter how dark the lies or how deep the betrayal. And so, the people of the kingdom would gather in the evenings, under the twinkling stars, to tell the tale of Anaca, the flower that blossomed from the depth of sorrow, and the children who emerged from a cow, bringing justice to a king and peace to a land. In the end, Anaca's story became a lesson for all, that even in the face of great evil, the light of truth would always find a way to shine. But what have you learned from this beautiful tale from the Hausa community? Please make sure to leave a comment and subscribe for more real African folktales.